What's going on, everyone? My name is Johnny Weeks. I'm a licensed investment advisor with Inception Financial Services. We partner with the AFI Group. This is my partner and the founder of Inception Financial Services, Eddie Shu.
Johnny, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to be here. We basically just want to talk about our current economic climate a little bit, talk about the truth for a baby boomer retirement, who the majority of our clients are. So can you just run us through a little bit of an agenda about what we're going to talk about in this video?
Yeah, for sure, Johnny. Most people have no idea or don't realize that taxation over the course of their retirement is going to be the largest expense that they have to pay. And reason being is, we all realize that the government is spending money like drunken sailors right now, and the debt is just ballooning out of control. And the deficit, what we're spending over what's coming in, just keeps growing almost exponentially. So we have been in a similar situation before. So we want to take a look, hey, what did tax rates look like back then? And historically, where are we today as well? Because we want to see what the precedent was, historically speaking, in order to understand where we potentially could go in the future. And then what we'll do is we'll highlight some strategies along the way, and then run through a case study to show the impact of paying some tax now and strategically positioning our funds in tax-free assets.
Yeah, I was going to mention that as well. I think the case study is what people are going to relate to the most. Maybe not the whole thing, but bits and pieces of it might be relatable to the situation that they're in right now. So that's the main part we want to get into. So
yeah, for sure.
Just go ahead and take us through an example of basically we want to show what this looks like visually for people to see the impact it makes, just before we get into some of the strategies on how to get to where this is right here.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I like showing some results from actual people. So this was an actual client who started off, had saved up about $1.5 million going into retirement. And what we like to do is say, okay, well, how much do you need to spend on an annual basis? How much are we going to need to spend in the future? Because our money isn't getting more valuable, it's getting cheaper because of inflation, right? So what we do is we take a look, hey, if you need to spend what you need to spend, how long will your money last? And on this slide, you see some strategies. You see strategy 1, you see strategy 2, and strategy 3. Now, strategy 1 and 2 are if they had never implemented any of these strategies, left their money where it was, and spent it as needed based off of the amount of income they think they're going to need. And strategy 2 basically assumes tax rates never change. And I think we know that that's not really all that realistic, that tax rates are likely to be higher. So in strategy 2, we see they run out of money by the time they're about 80-ish or so. And if tax rates double, they run out of money a couple years sooner. However, if they can insulate themselves, invest in some tax today, strategically position those assets, then their money will last them the rest of their life. They'll have enough income, and they'll actually, at age 100, still have $2.3 million left over. Now, let's take a look at that income, because they run out of assets, so we know that they're not going to have any more income at age 81 if tax rates stay the same. At 79, they run out of money if tax rates double. But by getting into a tax-free investment strategy or a tax-advantaged investment strategy, we're able to increase their lifetime income by $1.6 million. And every time we go into this process, our goal is to help increase that lifetime income by $500,000 to $1 million plus in income. And we've been pretty successful at doing that. But again, like I said, what we need to do is, in order to understand where tax rates could go, we should take a look at where they've been.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll do a quick little history lesson, I guess, on the marginal tax brackets here in the U.S. As you can see on the screen, we show all the way back to 1900, where we show World War I and World War II. And we see our government debt is the white line there, and how much of a percentage that is compared to our GDP. You can see right now in 2020, we're actually exceeding where we were in World War II. And during the world wars, you have excess spending for obvious reasons. You need to defend the country and do what you have to do, regardless of the cost. But as you see in the red line, the highest marginal tax bracket generally followed suit and was all the way up to around 94% in the Second World War. And as we paid that debt, that dropped the tax rate as well down to about 70% in the 70s, and then eventually all the way down to where we are right now at 39% as the highest tax bracket. But as I mentioned before, we see our debt rising substantially compared to our GDP. And it's probably safe to say we're fighting a third world war, but it's against ourselves and the coronavirus, which is out of our control. But as you can see, we really have no other option. We're either going to cut spending drastically, which I don't see happening, or we're going to have to increase tax rates a little bit. And the current administration is already diving deeper into that as we speak. So let's look a little bit into the federal deficits, meaning just the amount that we spend versus the amount of revenue that we bring in taxes. And since 2017, it was already beginning to increase, and we were in a very good economic climate. So you look in 2019, 2020 is over $1 trillion, and that was pre-COVID. Then everybody knows what happened in last year, and we had to do the CARES Act for another 2.7, and we were already projected over 1.1 trillion for this year, and that doesn't include the 1.9 trillion dollar stimulus that we already passed. So with all of that, all the historical federal deficits leading up to this moment, we're already over 28 trillion, getting close to 30 trillion if you count the next stimulus. And Eddie, why don't you tell everybody what happens once we get to 53 trillion?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we all realize that a nation that has $53 trillion in debt, I mean, we're barreling towards this thing like a freight train. We know there's issues. The main issue is, given current tax rates, if we achieve $53 trillion in debt, the amount of tax revenue coming in will only be enough to service the interest on that debt, much less pay for any of those federal programs that we know exist out there. And I mean, a lot of people realize that we have to raise taxes. Johnny, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up this article. This is from Janet Yellen. It's all the way back in 2018. I highlighted the date there. This is her, and she is actually currently now our Secretary of the Treasury for the United States. And almost 3 years ago, or I guess 2.5 years ago, she was already saying if she had a magic wand, she would raise taxes. But in some of the key points that I want to mention is that she talks about cutting retirement spending, which we're going to get into a little bit about Social Security, and notes that it only gets worse as the more baby boomers retire. It's like the largest generation of people retiring all at one time. So that's what we'll get into here with the Social Security. And we want to basically talk about what our deficit is even going towards, because I bet a lot of people don't even understand why we have a deficit and what all that is funding. So Eddie, you can tell them a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, our debt continues to grow because not only do we have our debt, we have our interest on that debt. We have to pay for programs like Medicare. We have to defend our nation. You know, people are very concerned about Social Security. How long will it last? Will we get our full benefit from it? You know, we've got to pay for infrastructure and all of these other programs. And Johnny, if I had to ask you to pick two that you think are going to add the most to our debt as a nation, what would you pick?
Well, coming right off the fresh $1,400 stimmy, I would have to say stimulus might be one of them.
Now that has added a substantial amount of debt, but over the course of the next decade, realistically, it's going to be Medicare and Social Security. Now, most of us are worried about Social Security, as I mentioned, continuing to get that benefit when we're eligible for it. Yeah. But what a lot of us don't realize is Medicare and rising health costs, and the fact that we have 70 to 80 million baby boomers retiring to the tune of 10,000 per day. Medicare is actually probably going to be an issue that's 5 times worse than Social Security. But let's talk about what's really going on with Social Security. Now, Social Security was started in 1935. And back then, when it was started, for every person that was taking a benefit, there were 42 people that were contributing to that program. And in order to be eligible, in order to actually take Social Security, you had to be 65 back then. And this usually makes a lot of people laugh. The average life expectancy was only 62. So they didn't expect most people to even collect Social Security. And if you reach the ripe old age of 65 and started collecting Social Security, on average, they would only take 2 years worth of benefits. So do you think Social Security was pretty solvent back then?
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah,
40,
totally. I mean,
42 to 1 is pretty substantial.
exactly. They thought they were designing it to last forever. But again, what we said is we have 70 to million 80 baby boomers retiring. Again, 10,000 people per day. They had 30 million less kids than their parents. So now if we take a look, for every one person that's contributing, or excuse me, that's taking a benefit, only
Yeah, we only
3 are
have 3 people.
contributing. In another decade, it's going to get down to 2 to 1. And what's the earliest that we can take Social Security now?
62.
That's
They
right,
dropped it down.
62. And if someone starts drawing at 62, they're likely going to draw on that for roughly 23 years. So has Social Security changed over the years? Yeah, of course. I mean, it basically went from being insurance against living too long to a pension program that pays us for almost a quarter of our life. There is a lot to worry about as far as Social Security and that benefit
Yeah,
goes.
definitely. That's what I get into in the next slide. There is a lot to worry about because a lot of people nowadays are using this as their main source of income in retirement. And that's not really like what we talked about. That's not really what it was designed for. According to the CBO, it's going to run out in like 13 years. And when I say run out, I don't mean run out of money completely, but they're going to have to substantially reduce benefits by, they're only going to be able to generate enough to pay about 75% of the benefits that you're getting now. And we're going to go deeper into taxation a little bit later, but that's not including the tax. If you make a certain threshold in income in retirement, you're going to get taxed on your Social Security a lot as well. So that further reduces the benefit. And as we know, it's hard to plan for retirement when you can't really guarantee what you're going to get every year over year. So,
All right, Johnny, now that we've scared everybody a little bit, should we go ahead and get into some of the strategies?
yeah, let's do it. Yeah, it's not meant to scare anybody, but we just want to raise awareness of the fact because I think a lot of times the media kind of just pushes it down and just says everything's all right. So we just want to raise awareness and then allow the people to make decisions on their own, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So to implement the strategies, we need to understand the types of investments that we have. And while there are millions of types of investments out there, realistically, you can break them down into 3 categories. You have your taxable investments, which is essentially you pay taxes on the money that you earn, you invest that after tax money, and whatever gains you earn on it, you get taxed on those gains as well. It can be a fairly inefficient way to save money, but it makes for a great emergency fund for us because we want to have some funds that are very readily available. Tax deferred vehicles, most of us know about these because we have a 401k plan or an IRA. We basically defer funds or income into these accounts. We get a tax deferral on that, so we get a tax break on it now, but when we need the money and when we want to take the money, every dollar we take out gets taxed as a dollar of earned ordinary income. So you
Yeah.
could have
And
like
just
$1
to
million
touch on that,
in this.
just to, bring up how important this bucket is, we're not necessarily saying it's bad, but you got to remember that you're deferring the calculation as well.
Yeah, exactly. So
Like
you
it's
could have
one
a,
thing
I
to
mean, you could have
plan
$1
for the
million.
tax rates that we have now, but then it's another thing to have that number not be set in stone, and that can be constantly changing as we're seeing right now as the current administration wants to bump up capital gains tax and and take away the step up in cost basis and certain things like that. So it all goes back to it's hard to plan without any certainty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so Johnny, I apologize for the interruption. I was going to say you could have $1 million in this bucket, and if you can't accurately predict what tax rates are going to be in the future,
Yeah.
you know how much money you have?
No,
No,
exactly. We don't.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's hard to plan if you don't know how much money you have. And then, of course, our favorite bucket, the tax-free, where we pay taxes on the money now, we invest in vehicles where it grows tax-free such that we never have to pay taxes again. Now that we know the tax treatment of all of these, let's go ahead and get into Mr. and Mrs. Jones. for the ease of numbers and calculations and things, we're going to say they're both 50 years old. Household income is 100,000 a year, and they want to retire when they're 65. Now, I want to make it clear as we go through this example isn't going to fit every single person exactly. But what I want you to do is notice that there are going to be certain aspects of this that are going to apply to you. And I want you to notice those and kind of take a mental note and keep track of those particular parts of this presentation or of this case study. So now we know what they're making. We know when they want to retire. We've got our 3 buckets, right? Our taxable, tax deferred, and tax free. We're going to say they've saved up $500,000 in combined IRAs. That's tax deferred, right? So any dollar that comes out is going to be taxable. They've got 100,000 in mutual funds, straight taxable investment. They use after-tax money. They get taxed on the gains. We're also going to say that they're contributing 10% to their 401k. For this example, they're not getting any match on this. And then they realized that they needed to have some life insurance. And they know that in retirement, roughly 1 out of 2 people are going to require some degree of long-term care. So they purchased a long-term care policy. Now, if this couple went into the traditional tax-deferred paradigm advisor's office, realistically, what's going to happen is, the first thing they're going to do is congratulate you, because that's what they do. Congratulations, you've done an excellent job saving for your retirement. But while you're down the road, you're only earning 7%. We think we can earn you 8%. So go ahead and move that money over to our management. Mutual funds, taxable, that's a great emergency fund. You're getting 3%. Let's just go ahead and bump that up to 5%. We think we can get you better returns. 401k, that's a great way to save for retirement. So keep doing that. If you quit your job or leave your job, give us a call. We'll roll that into your IRA, maybe save you some fees or some break points. Get it all under one roof, kind of make things simple for you. As far as the life insurance and the long-term care, those are great risks to mitigate. We don't really deal with that, but just go ahead and keep on doing that. Now, Johnny, do you see any red flags here?
The traditional advisor would not, but I see red flags all across the board.
Yeah, exactly. Do I have an issue with having $500,000 in an IRA?
Nope, that's not the issue now, but we're gonna get into the issue here in the next slide.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not worried about having that $500,000 now. What I'm concerned about is what happens if that 500,000 in that IRA grows at 8% for 15 years. Most people haven't heard of the rule of 72, but you can take an interest rate, divide it into 72, and it'll tell you how long before your money doubles. 8 into 72 is 9 years. So in 9 years, that's going to be $1 million. Add another 6 years, now we've got 1.6 million. I've got an issue with 1.6 million. Johnny, do you have an issue with 1.6 million?
Yeah, and we'll talk about some ways that we can mitigate against those issues.
Yeah, exactly. So 1.6 million, even if we don't need to spend it, required minimum distributions, when the government tells us we have to take it, will bump us up into some of the higher marginal tax brackets. And that says taxes now. That's not even if tax rates go up. So what we need to do is we want to prevent that IRA from growing. And how do we do that?
Well, we have a couple different strategies. You mentioned the highest marginal tax bracket. We can use some of these Roth conversions, which is just converting your traditional IRA money into a Roth. There's no limitations on that. You can do as much as you want. The only caveat is you got to pay the tax at the current rates. And as we know, we're pretty low right now compared to historical tax rates. But assuming 40% taxes on $500,000 worth of conversions, I don't know really any family that just has $200,000 of liquid money just sitting around waiting, eager to pay taxes. So we're going to have to strategically use these Roth conversions in amounts that's not going to bump us up to a higher tax bracket.
Not to mention, Johnny, if we told a couple or a family that they had to pay $200,000 in taxes on $500,000, there's no way they would ever call us back.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to want to strategically use these to where we're paying a little bit of tax at a time. And that leads me to the other point, or the other strategy that we have, which is the 72T. What this one does is allows us to tap into our IRA pre 59 and a half, equal distributions every year for 5 years or up until age 59 and a half, whichever one is longer. So this is just one of those ways where we can get around the rules a little bit and get money out of our tax deferred vehicles a little bit sooner without having to wait till age 59 and a half. And they're like currently a 50-year-old can take out about 5% per year. And then there's also one other strategy that I don't think we put in the presentation, but can you tell them a little bit about the rule of 55? It's just
Yeah, sure. A lot of people
a
haven't
third
heard
way
about
around the
Yeah.
rules.
Yeah, just a lot of people haven't heard about this one, just, with a lot of people changing jobs and things like that. But if you work for the same employer for 15 years, you contribute to the 401k and you retire at age 55 or older, but younger than 59 and a half, you're allowed to take distributions from that 401k. You still have to pay the tax, but you don't get penalized because you're under 59 and a half. So
Yeah.
it's 15 years at the same employer, retire from that employer. At age 55, you can start taking distributions. So
Yeah.
that
So
can definitely help some people out.
exactly. Yeah. It's like what you don't know, you don't know. So there might be a situation where that helps a family out, get shift money earlier over into tax free. But if they hadn't watched this or whatever, done extensive research, they wouldn't even know that exists.
So what we're going to do is we're going to implement that 72T and start taking that 5%, because our goal is to keep that IRA from growing and try to keep it around $500,000. Now, our mutual funds at 100,000, we know the taxable investments can be fairly inefficient because we get taxed on what we put in and we get taxed on the growth. So if we use that as our emergency fund, what's the right amount to have in there?
Yeah, well, we want to have it around 6 months worth of living expenses for anything that happens as an emergency.
Yeah, so what we did is we did the math, and in order to get this couple down to 50,000, which is going to be 6 months worth of living expenses, we're going to take out about $6,000 a year and shift that over into tax-free. Now, how do we feel about 401ks that don't have a match?
We're not really a fan of contributing to that if there's no match. If there is a match, then everyone can agree that taking the free money is going to be the best thing to do.
Yeah,
But
everybody loves free money.
in this scenario, there is no match. So we think that you're better off, investing in a little bit of tax now, getting in tax free. So then it sort of gives you the peace of mind in retirement, that money is actually yours and that balance.
Sure. And then as far as term life and long-term care, those are definitely important risks to mitigate, because both of those could definitely upset your finances entering retirement or while you're retired. But we think we actually have a better way of mitigating those risks. So we're going to recover the 2 and the 4,000 and get those shifted over into tax-free as well. So that leaves us with a total of 47,000 that we're going to shift into tax-free. Now, do we really have 47,000 that we can shift into tax-free?
Not yet. There's a couple taxable events on this that we'll go over.
Yeah, that's right. So taking the 25,000 using the 72T, that's taxable event. And then the fact that we're not contributing to that 401k, that's another taxable event. So we're looking at an additional 35,000 in taxable income. If we assume 30% tax, that leaves us with 10,500 in taxes that we're going to have to pay. And so if we take that directly out of the 47,000, we don't get penalized. We can actually take it out of those funds. That's going to leave us with 36,500 that we are going to shift into tax-free. Now, what is our first favorite vehicle that we're going to use for tax-free?
We're going to try to get as much money as we can into that Roth IRA, whether it be through some sort of conversion or just contributions. And once you're age 50, they have a catch-up provision. So we're going to be able to contribute about 7,000. I know there's a little typo on the screen. That moves up constantly.
We're still contributing for COVID 2020.
Yeah, but you can do 7,000 per year. All distributions after age 59 and a half are going to be 100% tax free. And it doesn't cause Social Security taxation, which I mentioned before is a possibility if your taxable income in retirement gets above a certain threshold.
Yeah, so the few $100s that we miss out for the Roth isn't going to impact the results that we get. So
Not too
we have
much.
36.5 that we're contributing. We're going to just use the 2020 numbers of 13,000, so that leaves us with 23,500. Now, where can we take that 23.5 and put it such that it grows in a tax-free basis? Now, I'm going to talk about an investment that a lot of people haven't necessarily heard about, and it can be very impactful when used in conjunction with a Roth IRA. The goal is to put our money in so that way it grows, and when we take it out, we don't have to pay any taxes on it when tax rates are likely to be higher in the future. And this particular investment, there's no penalties if we take the money out pre-59 and a half. There's no 1099s. What does that mean?
No tax on the gains.
Exactly,
The
no
capital gains on
tax on
those
the growth.
investments.
We'll never get a 1099 for that. If we use the money correctly, our distributions are completely tax-free as well. Are there contribution limits for the Roth?
Yeah, 7,000 per year.
Yeah, we talked about the 6,000 for if you're under 50, 7,000 if you're 50 or older. This investment has absolutely no contribution limits. There are also no income limits. For a Roth, if you start earning in excess of 200,000 a year, you're not even allowed to contribute to it. And finally, there's no legislative risk. What does that mean? They can't change the rules on us. They changed the rules on this a few times in the 80s, but what they did is we know what a grandfather clause is. They grandfathered everyone who is already in the existing programs in. Not to mention, most members of Congress actually use this. So I don't think they're going to change the rules and not grandfather themselves in. I know not most politicians are selfish that way, are they? The only real caveat, because most people think, hey, well, you know, this sounds like a Roth IRA, only better. There is one caveat. In order to recognize all of these benefits, we actually have a little spigot that's attached, and there's going to be some fees that have to be paid. Now, what do those fees go toward? They actually go toward the cost of term life insurance. When we're in retirement or nearing retirement, do we necessarily need life insurance?
Generally not. Normally the kids are out of the house, everything's paid for, at least we hope so. But
Yeah,
yeah, generally we
I
don't
know,
need term
right?
insurance.
So yeah, so the companies that sponsor this investment vehicle and this asset recognize that. So what they said is, if you have a long-term care need, you can utilize the death benefit that's associated with that term insurance for the purposes of paying for long-term care. Let's say our death benefit is $400,000. They'll allow us to roughly take out 25% per year for 4 years, specifically for the purposes of paying for long-term care. Most people don't realize traditional long-term care, you pay into it, and if you don't use it, that money's gone. Nobody gets anything. And that can be a really sore topic. Nobody wants to pay for something that they never use. So in this case, we're getting all those benefits. If we need long-term care, we can use the death benefit for that. If we pass away peacefully in our sleep, somebody gets the death benefit. What do we call this? Well, we call this an LIRP, which stands for a life insurance retirement plan, because the primary goal of this is to accrue a substantial amount of tax-free assets and wealth that we can spend on our lifestyle when taxes are likely to be substantially higher. Why life insurance? In order to reap those benefits, the IRS dictates that there has to be a portion of those assets that go to pay for that life insurance.
Yeah, and just to mention something about the long-term care too, I know we discuss all the time. I mean, no one wants to pay for it because, like you said, it's a use it or lose it type of situation. But we see all the time that if there is some sort of event that causes like the need for long-term care, that it could be like one of the fastest ways to burn through your retirement income. So mitigating against that risk is a huge relief, just in the financial sense as well.
All right, Johnny, I got a question for you. If you were retired today, I know you got like 40 or 50 years before that happened, but if you were to retire today, what tax bracket would you like to be in?
If I had the choice, I would hope that I pay zero taxes.
So you're saying 0% tax.
Yeah, I think it is possible. Given
I
everything
don't
that
know,
we
Johnny.
talked about, it's possible.
I think I looked at the IRS charts. I didn't see a 0% tax on there. So Johnny's saying he wants to be in the 0% tax bracket. So let's see how we did. We got our buckets, right? We did our shifting and we implemented our strategy. So we contributed to a Roth IRA. As long as we're 59 and a half, we can use all those funds and we pay no tax on that. We contributed a substantial amount to the LARP. Regardless of our age, we take that money out correctly, we pay no tax on that. Now, if you remember, we had this IRA that we were trying to keep from growing with the 72T. Now, if we did a good job, how much is going to be left there?
Well, the 72T is going to be, we want that to be under our standard deduction in order to not have a taxable
so
event
if we
for
did a
us.
good job of keeping that IRA from growing, we should just have 500,000 left there, right?
Yeah, 500,000, and then our 72T distributions will then be less than, the threshold for standard deduction. And if we can get that to happen, then there's not a taxable event for us in retirement.
Sure. But what we have is actually the deductions in retirement. We have our standard deduction, right? So to get that money out of there, like you said, we have 24,000 that we can take out. Now, is that indexed for inflation?
It is actually.
Okay, so let's assume that 3% over 15 years. Now we've got 37,400 that we can take out. We kept it from growing, so we have 500,000 left in there. So now we can take out 37,400 on an annual basis, tax-free from that IRA. So now we've got the Roth IRA tax-free, LIRP tax-free. Our IRA is now tax-free. So what does that do to our Social Security?
That keeps us under the provisional income threshold, so we're not going to pay any tax on that, which we established is really important considering we might not even have as much benefits as we think that we're going to have.
Exactly. So now we get our Social Security tax-free as well. Let's take a look. We showed a real life example of the before and after. So for this particular case study, making those moves and investing some tax, we're not saying we're not going to pay any tax. We're just saying, let's pay some tax now. I mean, it's costing $13,000 a year to get these results. But similar to the previous, we're going to take a look at the before and after. But if we can't get to the 0% tax bracket, what's the next best thing?
Right now it's 10%.
Let's tack on another 6%. So now we're looking at 16%. And if taxes double, now we're looking at 32%. So realistically, second place doesn't really look all that good. Yeah. And as promised, here's that before and after. So the Jones, if tax rates stay the same, strategy 2, and they made no changes, they would run out of money. Strategy 1, tax rates double. They run out of money sooner. And if they run out of money, what are their only choices?
Well, we like to say they could either move back in with their kids or they could die. And I know a lot of people might take the second one.
So finally, strategy 3, if they implement those shifts that we saw strategically, not only do they have enough income for the rest of their life, but they have 1.47 million left at age 100. And what does that do for their income? Tax rates double, they only get 2.6 million. Tax rates stay the same, 3.3. Both of those instances, they run out of money. Now we've improved their income by roughly 1.6 to $2 million. So in this case, obviously we achieved that goal of getting up to that million plus just by saving more efficiently. So if tax rates stay the same, they run out of money at 85, tax rates double, 75. At age 100, they've spent close to 6 million and have about $1 million to $1.5 million left over in reserves. So, I mean, this can be very impactful for a family or for those in retirement. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And speaking of the impact, I think that it only really hits home with people when they see their own numbers, because all of these are just, numbers on a screen and all round numbers. But I think when people see their actual numbers and their results, it motivates them, to want to take action. That's kind of what we're here for, to essentially just get them going. Like it's always hardest to get going. And once they do, then it kind of spirals, and we can set an actual retirement plan up for them, if they just give us the time to look through their situation and figure out the best solution to what
Yeah,
they're
sure. I mean,
going through.
everybody's family situation is a little different. Everyone has different needs. Everyone has different assets that they have. Everyone's been saving differently. We're all at different ages, so
Yeah.
realistically, what we need to do is, I mean, we can find out how much we can help with a simple 15-minute phone call. So if you'd like to, we have our cell numbers here. You can give either one of us a call, and we can start getting you headed down that path toward a 0% tax bracket in retirement.
Yeah. And
A lot of
go ahead.
times people talk about, well, hey, what if I have a pension? And, I mean, not a lot of those exist as much anymore. But here's the thing is, if you have a pension, it's going to be, we can't get you necessarily to the 0% tax bracket, but if you have that pension, we would want to get as much of those assets into tax-free as we can, because any dollar that you take out of that tax deferred is just going to increase your tax liability.
Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the number gain, the differences that it makes is substantial, but what can't be measured on the graph is the peace of mind and the certainty that you get in retirement. And I would say most Americans right now are worried in some way, shape, or form that if they're going to have enough money in retirement, or am I going to have enough income to supplement the lifestyle I want in retirement? And the only way to know is to run your numbers and to figure that out mathematically, and to just go from there. If you do and you have enough, then that's great. But there's always going to be some way that we can optimize that strategy for them. And the only way to know is if you just give us a call, and we'll figure that out for you.